Hello, everyone. Welcome again to my podcast and my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to talk about something for the first time here on my podcast. And I just learned from our guest that it's also his first time in an interview to talk about his experience. But before we do that, I want to invite you all to really take good care of ourselves because it's a very sensitive subject. Even for my podcast, as you know, this is what we talk about here. We cover the topic of suicide. But today we're talking about murder suicide, and we're going to talk to a victim of murder suicide. So he lost his wife and two kids. So we are going to talk about that, but please take good care of yourself. If it's triggering for you, don't listen to it because it is. I was talking to Michael, that's his name, and I said, "Yeah, Michael, this is the first time for me also." And it's like another level of triggering. So we're going to be very careful. We had a conversation before we recorded, but I just want to give you this trigger warning first. And then after that, thank you so much, Michael. I cannot tell you how honored I am. It must be very hard for you. You've been dealing with this for what, 9 years now?
Yeah, just over 9 years. It was January of 2014.
Yeah. So yeah, I remember I met Michael at the conference of the American Association of Suicidology that happened here in Portland in April. And as you remember, I did a series of interview. But when I saw him and I heard about what happened to him, I told him, listen, let's do this after the conference because it's something that we both need to prepare for. I can't do this in a hasty manner on a date, just let's just sit here and do this because it's a very tough subject to cover. So I'm so glad that you said yes, Michael, and that you are here willing to share with my audience your experience and what helped you. So thank you so much for saying yes and for being
Yeah,
here with us.
absolutely. And thank you for doing this and helping as many people as you do.
Well, so do you. As I know, you participate in many groups, right, to help. But here's the thing that I didn't know about Michael too, because I knew that he participated in meetings and everything, and he's been doing it for years. He helps a lot of people deal with their suicide grief. But it wasn't until he went to the conference that he was actually able to say it was murder suicide. I just well let's start there. I want to hear your story, but I want to hear because I am a person who believes, and as a clinician I believe in the power of words. And Freud said that. I mean, he was maybe one of the first, or maybe the first to say, the moment you say the word, it becomes reality. Is that how it felt for you during the conference? Tell me what happened then that changed the way you saw what happened or the way you
Yeah.
expressed it.
Yeah, it really is that way. I went to they had a meeting on murder suicide. And it was a smaller meeting. It was like an hour long, and I was expecting it to be, not a very large group, but it was in the conference room and it was packed, and I was kind of surprised. I was kind of shocked. And when they were talking about the murder suicide, I could relate to a lot of what was going on, especially with the lady who had lost her child, and her husband.
Hmm.
And so I could relate a lot to what they were saying and stuff. But in 9 years, not over 9 years, I had never actually been part of a discussion on murder suicide. I had talked about suicide. I had gone through other people's experiences with their suicide. I had given my experiences with losing daughters, with losing my partner, the whole situation. But I'd never actually discussed murder suicide. I mean, people knew what it was, but I'd always just said, my partner Kyler took our daughters and then killed herself. And that's how I phrased it. And part of me was saying that because I didn't want to. I mean, it's already a sensitive subject, so I
Hmm.
didn't want to make it more triggering to somebody by saying, that she killed our daughters.
Yeah,
And maybe that was for me too. I didn't
of
want it to
course.
be so hard for me, so I kept saying she took our daughters.
Yeah.
After that conference, or after that meeting, I did a few other things, met a few other people, went back to my hotel room, talked to my wife. I barely remember any of it.
Wow.
I remember a little bit here and there, but I don't remember much at all. I ended up taking a nap for a couple hours and woke up kind of confused, a little disoriented.
Hmm.
And later went to dinner with the founder of our group and talked a little bit. And I realized that that was the first time that I had ever talked about it um, with a group or with anybody else. And then when we were at dinner, she noticed that for the first time I had said that Kyler killed our daughters because I'd
Hmm.
never said the word killed. And, and so she even noticed that there's a change, there's a difference.
Yeah, yeah. And how does this difference feel to you? I mean, what changed in you? What do you
Mm,
think putting these two words together changed in your grief process?
It's, um, it made me realize that, I mean, this situation this sucks. Um,
Hmm.
but it doesn't do any good to soften what happened. I mean, it's like the whole stigma about suicide, about mental health. What good does it do to hide it? Kyler tried to
Yeah.
hide it from the world that she had mental health issues. What good did that do other than prevent her from getting some of the help that she needed?
Yeah.
And I think by me saying she killed our daughters puts greater emphasis on the fact that, yeah, this is a big tragedy. This is something that's not, I mean, why are we hiding it? Get it out in
Yeah.
the open and let's make this a conversation that we can talk about so that we can maybe prevent it from happening more and more.
Hmm. Yeah. You said that everybody knew it. Everybody knew what
Mhm.
happened. Would they talk about it though?
Oh, yeah. But a lot of it, and this is, I think, also where I say she took my daughters instead of killed them, is because a lot of people were like in awe. It's like, oh my gosh. And it was just overwhelming, like, I'm
Yeah.
so sorry for you type of a thing. Um, and I think in a way I don't want to hurt other people, so I'd rather not say it. But I'm realizing that that's not, it's better to actually say it because it really shows the gravity of the situation. And for me, like some of the best things I've ever done is talk to people, tell them what I've gone through, what I've done to get myself better, and have somebody tell me, "You
Hmm.
saved me today. You helped me
Wow.
today." Having
Yeah.
somebody tell me that, and so by opening it up and making it what it is, changes that a little bit. It makes it, hey, I know what I'm talking about. I've gone through hell. I have worked myself to a point that I'm comfortable, that I'm happy
Hmm.
again, that I'm productive, that I'm in a good place, and that I'm helping other people. I feel like now I don't need to hide that anymore. I don't need to soften it. I mean,
Hmm.
it's terrible as it is. Let's tell it how it is.
Hmm. Did it when you came back? Did you talk to your family about it too?
I did, yeah, and
Yeah.
explain the whole thing to them. My wife is very supportive. She's actually on the board of directors for our suicide group.
Hmm.
And yeah, she was really receptive and really productive with me as far as talking to me and giving me advice and
Hmm.
helping me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Michael, it's hard to even know. I mean, you're saying that it helps. I think the grieving, just saying the word. It's as you said, it's the same with suicide, right?
Yeah,
So
it is.
many of us hide it or don't use the word because it's just too heavy.
Right.
And when you put these two words together, I I don't know. I remember at the conference when they told your story.
Mm.
I think it was the leader of your group that shared your story, right?
I
And
think
then
she
yeah,
started in
she
mhm.
introduced
Yeah.
you
Her
and
name
she
her name is May. She's an amazing person.
yeah, yeah, May. I'm trying to get her here too. I
Yeah,
contacted her. So
yeah.
I remember May told your story and I mean even for me, I do this I've been doing this for 17 years now.
Mm.
And I looked at this, how on earth do you survive something like that?
Yeah.
Uh,
I almost didn't. I almost didn't. I'd never been depressed in my life. I had
mhm,
never gone through any type of depression. I've never really been around somebody who was depressed.
mhm,
And when I was with Kyler and I understood that she was depressed and she would go through her medication and she would try to she'd realize things were not working, so she'd go back in and get it changed. Or, at night she wouldn't sleep and she would just be up all night scrolling through diagnosis and
Wow.
ways that maybe she could help herself. I had never dealt with that before, ever. And then after this, I became very depressed and
Mhm.
suicidal myself.
Yeah.
And I've got two boys that were still living with me, and I don't know. It's just the depression just became overwhelming to the point that I didn't think about them. I was just so consumed with my grief afterwards.
I totally understandable. Do you think you connected with her when that happened? With what she
What do you
was
mean?
going through?
Uh,
In terms
no.
of the
I
pain
think
and
for me, I
yeah.
as far as the pain goes, yes, definitely. As far as I, I understood the the darkness. I understood where you get to that point where your brain is telling you, yeah, this is what you should do. Because I did get to the point where I almost died
Yeah.
by suicide myself.
Mhm.
Um, and I ended up, instead of cutting my wrist, I ended up cutting my arm, and I
Mhm.
started cutting as a way of
Yeah.
coping. And my thought when I got to that point, it really wasn't that, like seriously, in my head, I was like, I cannot let my son find me. It wasn't,
Mhm.
I can't do this because I'm
Because
gonna
of
leave
me,
them.
because I
Yeah,
want to live, to
yeah.
live, right?
It
Yeah.
had it had nothing to do with that. It was just, I'm in so much pain. This has to stop. I cannot go on this way.
Yeah.
And my thought wasn't, how could I do that to him? I mean, look what it did to me. How could I do that to him? That was not in my head at all. In my head, it was, I just can't let him find me. That's My brain got so twisted that that's what I thought was correct. And
Mm.
it took some time. It took some medication. It took time for me to
Mhm.
get to a point where I felt like, oh, you know what? I'm safe now. I feel like I'm not going to hurt myself.
Mm.
I can now start working on my grief, and I can now really do the hard work.
Mhm.
And it
Michael,
took me a
yeah.
year.
Yeah, Michael, I want to talk about what you say, what you call the hard work. But I think
Yeah,
before we go there, I
sure.
would love to hear about you and your wife and your kids because I want to honor their life as well. Because
Yeah.
we tend to
Um,
just remember what they did and how they died. And I
yeah.
don't want to go there. So I want to know, I mean, how did you guys meet? What
Well,
attracted you? I mean, what was attractive to you in her and in your relationship? And also, I mean, the struggles, because you said that she struggled with
yeah.
I don't know, suicidal ideation, but for sure with mental health issues. Yeah.
Yeah. She did. Yeah, a lot. I was working in financial aid at a small college here, and she was a student at the college. And we ended up meeting that way. Probably kind of just met and flirted for a few years, off and on that way. And then we finally got together. Um, and she was a very, very smart person, very kind. I remember going to the mall with her. She was working at the Buckle at the mall, and I went to have dinner or lunch with her. And there was a guy outside that didn't have, you could tell he was homeless, and she invited him in and bought him at lunch.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and that's how she thought of other people a lot. She was constantly, trying to improve herself. She was trying to help other people when she could. Um, and our daughters, Kennedy she was 13 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she was a swimmer. She was so good at swimming. She she cared about everybody. She
Mm.
constantly, was helping her friends. She would go there and support them and bring them up. She would do, a lot of things. It was, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and then Bella was just a fun 6-year old, and she just turned 7. She was just like, one of my favorite memories of Bella is going to pick her up, and then she just from school,
Yeah.
kindergarten, and
Uh-huh.
she's just, well, I guess it was first grade, but she just she ran at me and just jumped in the middle of the students, everything. My God, she just give me a big hug and just held on to me, and it's just, yeah,
Uh,
those
oh
memories
yeah,
are
that's
memories
the
that you
age.
you never forget.
That's yeah, that's the age that they still do that. They jump on
Yeah,
you, right?
they jumped. Yep, yep. Full on. She was so happy I was there at the end of the day. It was one of the first couple days she was at that school, and she just full on jumped onto me and, held onto me, and
Mhm.
yeah, it was,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, what was your family life at the time like?
Um, it was a little struggle here and there. We were trying to
Mhm,
bring everybody together. I've got, again, 2 older boys, so the girls at the time were 13 and 6, just turning 7, and then I've got 2 boys who were 19 and 17.
mhm,
And we got along okay. Everybody was fine, but
mhm.
the rules were a little hard. Kyler wanted to have the same rules for all the kids, and the boys were older, and it's like you can't have the same rules
Yeah,
for them. And
yeah.
there were arguments back and forth, and there was a lot of contention with the kids
Mhm.
and with her.
Yeah, that's not easy.
Yeah,
No,
it is.
bringing kids is
Especially,
hard enough.
yeah, and especially older teenagers who are
Mhm,
more independent and don't want to have the rules, and
mhm.
having somebody else tell them that these are the rules. Yeah,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
didn't like that too much.
Did you see that she was struggling at the time? You told me that she was struggling with sleep, so that you knew, but you just didn't know the extent of it, it sounds like.
I didn't. I found out later, after she had died, that she had attempted twice when she was a teenager,
Oh.
to the point that she was in the hospital and everything. I didn't know that before. She would be on depression medication, and sometimes she'd forget to take it. And then I'd notice things were getting bad, and I'd say something, and then she'd remember and start taking it again. Or she'd be taking it for a while, and all of a sudden her body would change, something would change, and it no longer worked. So
Yeah.
she had to go in and get it adjusted or fixed. And so she was constantly going through, and at night we'd lay down in bed and she'd just be on her phone, and it's like, do you want to talk? Are you okay? No, I'm fine. And she's just reading through different prognoses, different diagnoses, different ways to help, to maybe ways without medication, all sorts of stuff. But that's constantly what she was doing, was trying to make it so that she didn't have this mental issue that she was dealing with. And I couldn't even tell you the extent of what she was going with, because she tried to hide it. She did
Mhm.
not want people to know. um, she did everything she could to try and keep people from knowing.
Yeah. Yeah, and as you said, I mean, you're married to her and you did know about the prior attempts. How did
i
you
did
find out
i
about that?
I didn't. So, going through her journals and then talking to her sister and her parents afterwards, I found out that she had attempted, I think she was 15 when she had attempted. And then she had attempted again when she was, I think, 18 or 19.
Mhm.
Um, but in her journal, when she was 15, when she had attempted, she had said, she wrote in her journal that she didn't want to live, but she didn't want to leave her family. And she wondered if she could take her family with her.
Mm.
So that was kind of in her head from 15 years old on. So in her mind, the thought, I don't think, was murder in any way. I think in her mind it was, no, I'm saving them. I'm
Yes.
protecting them. I'm taking
Yeah.
them with me.
Yeah. And as you remember at the conference, when we heard Thomas Joyner, the
Yeah.
theorist, and he had a theory of, he has a book called The Perversion of Virtue. And
Mhm.
that's what he says. There are four, what happens when you do commit murder suicide is that, first of all, the first idea is the suicide itself, and then it morphs into murder too. But he says that it's a consequence of what he calls perverted virtues, and these virtues are justice, mercy, glory, and duty. And in your case, that's the one that he calls mercy, because that's the one that he associates with murder suicide, usually between either partners or parents and kids. I can't leave them to deal with this, so I'm taking
Yes.
them with me. Is that how
Yeah.
you see it? No.
Yeah. It's absolutely how I see it. I have no doubt in my mind. We had a discussion a year before this happened, and this
Mm.
is, I use this to tell people, to help people a lot, because we had this exact discussion about exactly what she was going to do, and she did exactly what she said. And this was a year before.
What
We
do you mean she
discussed.
told you? She told you
Oh
this is
yeah,
what I'm gonna really?
she said, you know what, I need to let you know this, and she said, I am suicidal sometimes. And I want you to know that if I decide to, I know how to do it. I know what I'm going to do. And this is it. And she just came right out and told me, that way. I'm like, you can't do that. And I said, first of all, you know, how could you leave your girls? Because when Kyler was 3, her dad died by suicide,
Oh.
and her family never talked about it ever, not a
Mm.
thing. And I remember one time, she got drunk, she got really upset, and she was like, "Why did my dad leave me?" You know, she, I think, internalized a lot of that stuff because she
Mm.
didn't have the facts, so she made it up, and she made it all about her, that he left her
Of course,
for some
yeah.
reason. And without being able to talk to anybody about it, yeah, she had nowhere to go. Um, and so when we talked about that, or when she told me that she was suicidal or could be suicidal, and if she did, this is what she would do. And I asked her, I said, "How could you do that to your girls? I mean, look what it did to you. How could you do that to Kennedy and Bella and leave them?" And she just looked at me like, "Are you serious? There's no way I could leave them. To leave them to deal with all this, to have somebody else take care of them without me there, no, there's no way I could do that." So in her mind, it wasn't necessarily mercy or anything. It was, I mean, I think it falls under that mercy category. But for her,
Mm.
it was just black and white. It's like, if I can save them, I'm saving them. And that's, I think, the way she thought about it. And it was more, the
Yeah.
girls, I don't think really were part of the suicide. It was just more of a, of course, the girls are part of me. And if
Mhm.
I'm not going to live, I need to protect them and take them with me. I really believe that that's what she thought.
Yeah, and that's the power of what you're doing and what I try to do with my work. I mean, let it out,
Mhm.
use the word, talk to kids about it. Don't silence about
Yeah.
suicide because kids will always, this is what kids do. Well, they will always believe it was their fault.
Yeah.
It's not my father took his life, it's my father left me.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wasn't enough,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So
And
that, yeah, that's how you feel.
I do use this, when I talk to people, because a lot of, for me, the guilt was probably the hardest thing because
Oh.
we had a fight. And I knew her emotional situation and stuff, and we would fight, and she would say things that you should never say to anybody to try and push me away. And her sister later told me that I was the only person ever in her life that didn't leave. I think the longest relationship she had
Mm.
before me was 6 months because she would say things to people and push them away. And I didn't. I just, that's like, okay, when you calm down, we'll talk. Always, always, always. That's what I did. When you calm down, we'll talk. We'll talk tomorrow. We don't need to argue tonight. And I let it go. The night that this happened was the first night that I stood up. It's the
Oh.
first night that I fought back. It's the only day that I
Mm.
actually, no, you are wrong. I am right on this. And I am not backing down on this. That was the only time. And I threatened to move out. I started to move out. She's then decided to kick me out, power struggle type thing.
Yeah.
And we let it escalate. And then that night it happened. And I use that to tell people, it's like, look, she told me a year before. I dealt with all of this for so long, yet I couldn't stop it. I mean,
Mm.
it wasn't my choice. And unless I
Yeah.
could be there 24/7,
No.
there was nothing I could do. Absolutely
Yeah.
nothing. And that is kind of how I help deal with my guilt, is that it took me a long time to realize I could not have stopped it. It was her choice.
Yes. Yeah, you were talking and I'm thinking about the phrase that I heard from Stacy Friedenthal she wrote in her book, and it's related to this. She says, "Do everything you can, but know you can't do everything."
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
is a limit, right? And it sounds like for the whole time that you were together, you were the one who were calm down and who were able to say, "This is not the good moment for us to talk about this.
Mhm.
Let's wait a little bit." So you're human. You're human. And really, it sounds like really nobody could stop her. It was something that
Mhm.
was in her mind for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, if there's anything that I can tell people who are grieving, who are going through any
Mhm.
suicide, is that recognize that it was not your choice. and
Mhm.
that, yeah, unless you lock somebody down, you can't
No,
stop it.
no, no. I hope that nobody blamed you, because that
Not really.
happens. No?
Not
Good.
directly. I mean, I think there were some people at first because the way the news reports things,
Yeah.
they don't get all the facts right, but they report the story. They report what neighbors hear. So yeah, at first there was a lot of people who thought I had done it.
Oh
And
my
then
God, Michael.
yeah, and it was hard that night. I was in the police department for 4 or 5 hours because they were questioning me, thinking that maybe I did this, and it took a while. Um,
They
After
had
a
to
little while,
investigate. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and I
Oh.
understood. I do, but but I was also in so much shock and stuff. I didn't even realize how long I was in the police station. It wasn't until my mother called a lawyer to get me out that I even realized it's like, wait, are you thinking I did this?
It didn't even
So
cross your mind. Yeah.
not even no, no. I was and I didn't even realize how long I'd been there. To me, it's like 1 second, 1 minute, 1 hour. It's like
Mm.
they all blended together at that night because it was so shocking, you know.
Mm.
And then
Do you
a
even
few people.
remember? Do you even
Oh
remember
yeah,
what happened? You do?
yeah.
Because for
Oh,
some people, I
vivid.
mean, I have zero memory of the few days after my dad died. But for
Yeah.
some people, like my sister, it's the opposite. She remembers every second of it.
Yeah, I remember it all because again we were moving. Again, she'd kicked us out that night, and they kicked me out and threw my clothes on the floor, and you're never going to see the girls again, and shut the door, all this stuff. And we fought a little bit, and okay, fine. And we had talked that night, and she said, "All right, the girls are at school tomorrow. Come and get whatever you can get before they get home from school."
Hmm.
And so I went with my mom. We got a few people, got a U-Haul truck, went over there, started moving things out of my stuff. She worked from home,
Hmm.
and the bedroom door was locked. And so I thought she was working because she didn't get along with my mother too well. But I think that's because she didn't want to. She was afraid of her. But so I was trying to talk to her through the door, and it's like, look, one of the contentions we had is some of the paintings that I had, and I told her, it's like, look, I'm leaving the paintings here. A lot of our issues were, she didn't get along with my boys very well, and there were a lot of contention with that. And my youngest boy was 17. He was graduating high school that year. He was going to go off to college. They were both going to go off. So it's like, let's give us 6 months. Let's let him graduate. Let's let him start to move out. We'll work on things, and then everything will be fine. So let's just separate a little bit until that happens.
Hmm.
Well, I was telling her through the door, it's like, I'm leaving the paintings, I'm leaving this, so I'm coming back. And she didn't respond to me, she didn't say anything. um, but she had died night before. I didn't know. I
Oh,
didn't.
so she was already dead at the
Yeah.
time, and you
Yeah.
didn't
And
know.
so, yep. And so we were moving everything out, and then we left, and still kept trying to talk to her. It's like, call me later, talk to me later. Let's, talk, whatever. And then later that night, I told my mom, I said, let's just drive by the house. I just don't feel right. And we drove by the house, and the car was parked in the exact same place. It hadn't moved. And even though the school was right around the corner, she didn't let the girls walk to school. So it's
Mm.
like, well, then that means the girls didn't go to school if she didn't move the car. And it was darker, the lights were all out, and all three of the girls are kind of scared of the dark. They always sleep with lights on, and all the lights were out. And I'm like, something's wrong. And her sister lived around the corner, so we called her sister. My brother was with me because he was helping move. Her sister came around. They went to open the door, and as soon as they opened the door, I just like, oh.
You knew.
So yeah, as soon as they opened the door, I knew, and I got out of the truck and I started going to the house, and my brother tackled me on the stairs and then dragged me away from the house.
Mm.
Yeah, and I remember just beating my fists on the brick wall and just like, how could she do that? And yeah,
Oh,
and
oh.
then the police came, and then they took us to the police station, and then we sat in the lobby for a while, and then they finally took me back and my brother, since he was there, and went inside. But then they let him out, and yeah, I just stayed there talking and answering questions for 4 hours, 5 hours.
And you already knew that by then you knew that
Yeah,
both the kids were dead too.
yeah. And I called her dad and talked to him, and um, yeah, and talked to her sister and stuff.
Wow.
Yeah,
I can't even imagine what you were going through. I mean, and have to be interrogated through all that.
It's kind of interesting because the interrogation at the time seemed like nothing. Because again, I didn't even realize how long I'd been back there.
Because you were not there, actually, right? Your mind was not there.
No, yeah, yeah, I was going through almost immediately. I should have done this. Why didn't I do that? I should have at
Yeah.
least called her dad. Her sister
Mm,
was right around the corner. Why didn't I at least call her and tell her what's going on? But I think in my mind, I was justifying by saying, well, I was going to, we were going to talk. We were going to work things out. We were,
mm-hmm,
but I was going back and forth even right then. Even that same night, I was already in the what if I should have done this, I could have done
yeah,
this, but
yeah.
all that.
That's when the what ifs start
Yeah.
immediately.
Yep. The woulda, shoulda,
Don't
coulda.
they? Yeah.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
I'm sure you were troubled by those for years.
Yeah. Well, and the guilt. I mean, again, I still, honestly, to this day, I still have some guilt that I
Mm-hmm.
didn't do something as far as the girls go. I completely understand. Like looking back on my life and things with her, uh, I think that there was probably 3 or 4 times that I stopped her from dying by suicide
Mm-hmm.
that I didn't know. I had no idea. But looking back on it,
Mm-hmm.
it's like an eye opener. It's like, oh my gosh, she was going to do it that night, and I happened to come home that night. Like New Year's, just before this happened. So 14 days before New Year's, I was painting a house my house that I had, the one that I had moved back into, but I was painting it because we were getting ready to rent it, and we had a little bit of a fight that night, New Year's the day before. But New Year's Eve, I just decided to go to the house just because I wanted to spend New Year's Eve with the girls. And
Mm-hmm.
Kennedy was watching TV downstairs, and I talked to her for a little bit, and then I went upstairs, and then Kyler just looked at me, and she's like, "Why are you here?" I'm like, "What do you mean? Why am I here?" And she's like, "How did you know you had to be here tonight?"
Hmm.
It never clicked. It
Wow.
didn't
Yeah.
register in my mind that that's what she was talking about. But looking back on it, she
You
was going to do it
knew.
that night. She was. I guarantee she was.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, it was constantly. It's just like, how did you know you had to be here? And she spent hours asking me that question. Why did you show up? And it just again, it never even clicked until afterwards.
No, it never does. I mean, it never crosses our minds, does it?
No, no,
No,
no,
it's
because
not
we're
supposed to.
because our minds are not that our minds are not thinking that way. And
No, no.
yeah. I mean, so I had read something afterwards that had said, like how could a mother do that to their children? Or how could anybody die by suicide? What in their mind is telling them
Mm-hmm.
that this is good? And it's like, yeah, that's the problem. Their mind is telling them out of every option possible, suicide is the best. That tells you that there's something cross, there's something wrong
Yeah,
with the way
yeah,
that they're thinking.
yeah, yeah. It's the only option.
Yeah,
It's not just the best, but the only
it's
option,
the only
right?
option. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And for some reason, all the other options just, go out of your brain, out of your mind.
Yeah. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking about something you mentioned about Kyla, that her sister told you you were the only one who didn't leave, right?
Mm.
And then you
Yeah.
left that day, and that's where the guilt comes from. But I'm
Yeah.
thinking about the sense of abandonment. And people who usually go through abandonment like that, the fear of being abandoned, it's so overwhelming that they would rather push someone away than to be abandoned by them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And I
it's
think that's what Kyler
keeping a
has done.
sense of control, right?
Right. Yep. Yes.
Does it make sense to you
It
when you
does.
look back
And and
now?
and Kyler would tell me that, or Kyler's sister Lindy would tell me that Kyler would push people away, and then
Mm.
she would feel justified. And you see, you were going to leave me anyway,
Mm-hmm.
and that
Yeah,
was kind of her attitude: is see, you were
yeah,
going to leave, so I just pushed you out earlier.
yeah. Because I don't want to go through that pain again
Exactly.
of being
Yep.
left. Yeah, I
Yep.
know what it feels like, right?
Yeah. I want it on my terms, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
How did your family react, and how did her family react? Because we know suicide is a different kind of grief.
Yeah. It definitely different. It was a little mixed. My family was extremely supportive. Uh, my boys had a few issues here and there because especially my older son, he was the one that really had the most problems with her, and he felt guilty about it too. And
Mm.
the problem is because I was so consumed with my guilt for the first year or more, I really did not talk to them about their guilt and their, you know, trials and things that they were going through. I wish I'd had, but they, I think, had other resources to, and then they were, of course, worried about me because I
Mhm.
was, not going down a good path.
Yeah.
Um, my mother was supportive. My sister in law, Rebecca, um, she's got a degree in psychology, and I had talked to her afterwards, and she felt really guilty too because she's like, "How could I not have seen this?" And I'm in
Of course,
the
yeah.
industry,
I'm
you know.
supposed to be trained for this, right?
Yeah, and and it's weird because it was me comforting her. It's like, yeah, you couldn't have seen this any more than I did. This Kyler hid it from everybody. She did not want anybody to know. So yeah, but Rebecca, I set up with her that if I had any issues at any time, I could call her. And there were times like midnight, I'm driving home somewhere and I'm gonna run this car off the road. I'm angry, I'm
Mm.
frustrated. And I called her.
Yeah.
And she was in bed, but she answered and she just talked to me. Didn't say anything, just, well, how's the weather? You know, what are you listening to? Where are you going? Where did you come from? And just simple daily stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. She
And it got,
listened.
yeah. And having that person, that one person to say, call me whenever and I'll just talk. I'll just listen. I'll just whatever, make sure you're safe. That that was key that first year is having her there.
It's as simple as that, isn't it, Michael?
It really is, and that's one thing when we do our group and the groups that I facilitate. That's one thing I tell people. It's like, look, in the first year or so, have somebody that you can reach out to. It doesn't matter who they are. Just get a couple of people that you can say, hey, if I have a hard time, can I call you for a minute, even if it's a midnight? I guarantee you'll find a couple of people who say yes and do it
Mhm.
because it could save you so much torment in your life.
Mhm. Yeah, I love the words of Edwin Schneidman. He said there are two questions to ask: where does it hurt, and how can I help?
Yeah,
It's not
I think
really
that
complicated. It
it's
really
not.
isn't. People
Yeah,
think that no, but I need to. I'll have to know what to do and what to say. No, you don't have to say anything. Actually,
right.
it's not
Oh no, you
about
don't.
talking. It's about listening.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And a lot of people, it's like, well, I don't know what to say. It's like, yeah,
That's good
neither do I.
enough.
I
Yeah.
don't know what to say either. You know? Yeah. I don't know how you do it. Neither do I,
Hmm.
But
Michael,
thank you for
I
acknowledging it.
would love to hear from you. What helped you? You said that during the first year, that was something that really helped. Maybe it was the main thing that helped.
Yeah.
What else helped you?
Well, so the first year was really bad for me. I mean, I was
Hmm.
depressed. I
Yeah,
was
suicidal too. Yeah.
suicidal. I turned to cutting, and I turned to cutting because I couldn't fix what happened, but I could fix the cuts. I could have that release, that pain, that whatever, and then I can spend a week taking care of my arm, or the cuts and stuff. And I got to the point where it's like, this, I can't do this. My mom was worried, everybody, and I had never been on depression medications. I finally got on them, and that I hated it. I hated being on them, but it mellowed me out completely. I had no desire to hurt myself. I had no desire to be happy. I wasn't sad. It wasn't, it was good though. It was great. It got me to a point where I could take some time. And that there's that phrase, time healed all wounds, which is not true, but time gives you the distance from what happened so that you can work through it. And that's what the depression medications got me through, is it got me to a point where it's like, okay, I think I'm okay. I know I'm not going to hurt myself now. I'm in a better place. I understand. I've got enough distance. It was about a year or so afterwards. I've got enough distance from the actual event that it's not overwhelmingly, pushing me down that dark path. And then I slowly worked off the medication
Hmm.
and then started to actually work on things. And for me, working on things was going to my group because I had individual counseling, and for me, it didn't work out well. I think the counselor was not a suicide grief counselor. She was just a grief counselor. She didn't understand. She was trying to make me do different, write with my left hand or what Kyler might think. And it's like, no, that's not what I need. But the group, when I went to group, that helped to hear other people say the thoughts that they were in their
Mhm.
head. And for me to say, I've got those same thoughts. Oh, okay. So I'm not different. I'm not, abnormal.
Mhm.
These people have the same situations, the same thoughts. And then to hear somebody give me an example as far as, I went through the forest today and there's all these dead trees along all the living trees. And that reminds me that the dead is among the living. So our loved ones are still with us.
Mm.
Things like that, just little things, going for hiking, going hikes or going running or doing little things like that. And so I started actually paying attention to what
Mm.
people were saying and then trying some of their advice. Not just, oh, yeah, that would be a good idea, but actually doing what they're suggesting to do. And then that helped. That actually did help me a lot. And so then
Mhm.
I started, okay, well, what else can I do? What else will help me? And so I started doing other things. I started, I don't know, for me, I started talking to the girls.
Mhm.
And I kind of did that throughout, but I started actively talking to them as I was doing things. And that helped me. May not help everybody, but it did help me. And I started, figuring out ways to help me grieve, to help me work through things, books I read, phrases, passages. But what helped me the most was I would go to group and I would share some of this stuff that I went through. I would share my story. I would share my loss. Um, and then I would share what I did and what has helped me and stories I've read or things that I've done or things that I've noticed. And then to have somebody at the end of group come up and tell me, knowing what you went through and seeing where you're at now, I know I can get there too. If you've lost three, I know I can get through losing one.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that helped. Like, oh man, that was a boost to know that my girl's story, their names, their memory is helping somebody else get through this tragedy. And I can't think of anything better that they would want to do in their lives would be to help people. I mean, Kyler loved helping people. So if she
Mhm.
knew that her memory and her story was helping somebody, it makes me feel like she would be happy and proud.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
you
then
talked
that
about
helps
so
me more than
yeah.
any.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand and I can hear in your words and in your voice. I mean the all all that you have been trying, throughout these years. And
Yeah.
the first thing that caught my mind was the metaphor that when you talked about the cutting and
Mm,
how
yeah.
cutting was I also in a way you taking care of yourself because you were taking care of your wound.
Yeah.
Just the metaphor. Okay, I this is a way for me, even though I know that it's really hard for people to understand cutting
Yeah.
and self-harm, and of course I'm not advocating that,
No.
but we understand that even for suicide it can be a protective factor. Sometimes people
Yeah.
associate that with suicide, but it can be the opposite. It can be a warning sign, of course it is a risk
Mhm.
factor,
Yeah.
but we know that it can help people not go there,
Right.
right? And it
Yep.
sounds like that's what it was to you. The second thing that I heard you say was how the medication helped you stabilize.
Yes.
I connect with you 100% because I the same thing after my dad died. I was in this state of confusion, and then I was diagnosed with depression, and I took medication, and I felt the same way that you did. Because what the medication is does is it erases the
Yeah.
extreme emotions. You don't get desperate anymore, but you also don't get very happy. So you
Right.
kind of stay
Exactly.
in that middle zone, right?
Yeah.
And for some people that's very difficult to live with. But when you are in that state of despair, and in your case you were suicidal, it keeps you alive
Mhm.
and it stabilizes you enough, long enough for you to say, okay, now I'm ready to taper off the medication. That's what I did, and that's
Yep.
what you did too. At some point,
Yep.
you just go, okay, I can do it alone without the medication. And that
Exactly.
sounds like that's what happened to you.
Right.
Yeah, and the third thing is group. I honestly believe, Michael, I'm with you. First of all, most clinicians, unfortunately, don't know how to deal with suicide grief. They don't. I know because I get people who come to you after they've tried a few and they hear, I hear all these stories of people trying to fix you or they just
Hmm.
don't connect. They don't
Yeah.
connect. I
They
remember a
they
client of
don't
mine.
understand.
No, I remember a client of mine, Paula. I needed someone who gets it, who
Yeah.
knows what I'm talking about because it's different and it is.
It is.
And it's helpful. I'm not saying it's not helpful. If you find someone who can deal with suicide, right? And knows how to do that, it's good. But I truly believe that nothing is better than group.
Yeah. Yeah. And being with people that can share that understanding and really can give you some of the advice that you're already thinking yourself. You're just like, for me, there was a lot of times it's like, why am I thinking this? I couldn't really give you an example, but there's a lot of times it's like, why should nobody else that I know lost their, so and so to a car accident or to cancer or something like that? They're not feeling this way. Why am I thinking this? But then to be in a group with other people who are thinking that kind of normalizes me, kind of makes me feel like, you know what? Yeah, your thoughts are not abnormal. This is a different type of a situation.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, in what you said too. One of the best things about group to me, two things that I think are very important and very healing. One is the fact that when you realize, wow, I'm not alone. I'm not alone with thinking I'm being crazy or that there's, like you said, I'm not
Yeah.
abnormal, right? So this
Yep.
feeling of like you said, it's normalizing but not feeling alone with your pain, which is very healing. And the other thing is hope. I can't even measure the amount of hope, Michael, that you give people just by being there. Because if you've lost someone to suicide, but you look at someone in group and say he lost his wife and two kids and he's still here and he's functioning and he's able to help and talk about his experience. If he can do it, I can.
Yeah. Yeah. And with our group, our lost group, there's a at the end of the meeting we have a little thing where we talk, and it's one of the phrases. So on this pamphlet that I'm writing, I put this on here because I think it's really important. It says. With loved one suicide survivors, that's our group. It says, knowing that we are not alone as survivors of suicide, we believe that together we can find help in healing our wounded hearts and in rebuilding our lives.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
it's powerful. I think that's really important,
yeah, yeah.
because together we do help each other.
Yeah, yeah, and it is a different kind of grief. So that's why
Yeah,
we have
it is.
I facilitate as a volunteer every month a group on suicide
Mhm.
grief, and I just see healing all the time.
Yeah,
Just just the way that the group members interact with each other, because
yeah,
that's what I try to do. I mean, I'm out of here. I'm just a facilitator. It's you guys, right? You're
yep.
do the healing, help each other, and how they engage with each other, and how,
Mhm.
I'm sure you've seen this so many times. Sometimes you can tell that one group member is going through hell that day, and how everybody unites and they go, okay, this today it's about you. How can we
Yeah,
help you? I mean,
exactly.
it's just the most powerful experience you can have.
Yep. Yep, and being able to share the memories, and not just the suicide and
No,
the aftermath, but the memories of who they were
yeah,
and the stories that you remember that make you
yeah,
smile,
yeah.
Like I've got this I heard this from somewhere and I don't remember what it was,
Mm.
but it's like sometimes a memory comes out of my eye and runs down my cheek, But that
Yeah,
happens a
I
lot
love
in
that. So it
the
comes
group.
out your eyes and runs down your cheek. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's fine. And
Yeah.
I'm glad that you feel comfortable today talking about it. And you cry and you stop and you breathe and you talk again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Y-
I've with again, for me, it's been 9 years, so I've had quite a bit of time to do this, but I feel like I've worked around my grief enough that when it does fall in my lap, which it does from time to time,
Mhm.
I know how to pack it back away. I sit with it for a minute, I
Mhm.
process it, I use it, and I put
Mhm.
it away.
Mhm. How are your kids doing now, Michael?
They're good. They're both they don't seem to have any residual issues with
Mhm.
what's going on now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're supportive of me. They're obviously sensitive to the suicide topic when it comes up with other people and stuff. But yeah, they're both good.
But do you open that door? I mean, they know that they can talk about it if
Oh,
they want
absolutely.
to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It, oddly enough, we don't talk about it. We really don't.
Yeah. But the difference is, do you not talk about it because it doesn't come up?
Exactly.
Or do you not talk about it because it's forbidden? This is
Oh
the
no, no, no.
difference,
It's
right?
always
And
yeah. It's
with
always
you, it's
open.
because
Yeah.
I'm sure they would if they,
Yep.
if it comes up and I'm sure it comes up for everybody here
And
and there.
and it does
Maybe
come up.
not when you're all
Yeah.
together.
Right. And it will come up. There'll be times where I'll talk about what I'm doing with the group.
Hmm.
And Matthew will say something or Brandon will say something, and yeah, we'll have a little discussion. But that's what we need. We don't need our relationship with me and those two boys are you know we're in a good place, and
Hmm.
we don't need to bring it up because we've gone through a lot.
Hmm.
We've already
Yeah.
worked through a lot, and so now when it comes up, it's more of a yeah, this is what we're thinking. Okay, yep, and me
Yeah.
too, and that's about all we need.
Yeah. Michael, tell me, what have you learned with this experience about yourself? Because I look at you, I don't know you, but I hear what I see when I look at you and I hear your story is a very resilient, very kind man. What have you learned about yourself through all this?
Oddly enough, I think I've become kinder.
Mm,
Um, I a lot of things don't bother me anymore. A little like sure I get frustrated with things, but it's like, you know what, in the overall, this really doesn't matter.
yeah.
This little annoyance that's bugging me today and really frustrating me. All right, it doesn't really matter. That's
Mm-hmm.
not that there's definitely worse things that can happen. And yeah, I've learned to become more compassionate. I think
Mm-hmm.
a lot more understanding of anybody's struggles, not just my own, but just any struggle, because you never know how deep that is. I mean, most people, just like Kyler, it's the tip of the iceberg, is all they're showing you. There is
Mm,
so much under that water. You have no idea what they're going through.
yeah.
And I've learned to become a lot more compassionate and a lot more understanding.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you're more able to ask the questions and to talk about it
Yeah.
and open your heart
Yeah.
to listen, right?
Oh, sure. When I drive for Lyft and Uber, I'm just kind of on the side. And in my car, I've got a little entertainment system. And on it, I've got a little sign that I say that's supported by loss. And there's two phrases that I've got on there. And it says, one of them says, talk about suicide to stop suicide. Because I really truly believe that if we talk about it and open it up and end that stigma, that it will help people who are feeling isolated. And then the other thing that is on there, it says, suicide doesn't end the pain, it just passes it on to those who are left. And having that in my car when I'm giving people rides, I cannot tell you how many people open up.
Open up
And
because they see that.
yes,
It's
they
an
see
open
that.
door.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. And they talk. And I had one guy, it's like, yeah, I lost my brother 2 years ago, and I have never been able to find a support group or anything about it. And being that he saw that, he got the information, he's come to group, other people just, yeah, I've had people tell me that they are suicidal. And we've had a discussion during the entire trip, about all sorts of things. It's just,
Hmm.
it opens things up. And, I feel very confident and, about talking about that subject because, in my opinion, anybody you listen to, you're helping.
Do you think that it works the same way for you now? Are you more open to asking for help?
When I feel like I need help, yeah, I don't know, I've gotten to a point where a lot of things just don't bother me anymore.
Mm.
It really doesn't.
Understandably, it's
And
perspective, right?
it really is. Yeah. I mean, it's like uh, early on, I did a project where I would write down, I told my story over and over and over and over again so that I could tell it without
Mm.
sidetracking onto all sorts of different tangents, that I could be succinct and say, this is what happened. These are the facts of what happened.
Uh-huh.
And that helped. And then I got to the point where I was writing down um, uh, just just different methods, different things that I would do. And I don't know, want to say it numbed me, but it kind of
Mm.
normalized things. Instead of it
Mhm.
being a shock when I would tell somebody,
Yeah.
because it was a shock to me, I still get emotional because the emotions are, to me, it's right at the top of that cup. It's always just about ready to boil over, but it's not for the most part. And
Mhm.
when it does, it's just a little bit. And I'm open to that.
And
I'm
that's
fine with it.
fine. And that's
It's
fine.
perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Exactly. I have no problem sharing my emotions. I have no problems crying when I need to cry. And I
Good.
tell people that all the time because if they see me do it, it opens them to feel comfortable doing it.
You're modeling.
And and sometimes that's what you need is you just need to cry. You just
Mhm.
you just need to talk. You just need to get it out.
Yeah.
But a lot of the things that I thought were like people are getting upset over this. You think that is a bad day? Let me tell you what a bad day is. you know.
Mhm.
So a lot of these things just don't matter anymore. I mean, sure, I'll work on it. I'll try to fix it, but
Yeah.
I'm really not going to put that much emotion into it because yeah, it's just not worth it.
Yeah, it won't stay, right? It won't
No,
stay. It doesn't stick.
no, not at all. Yep.
Okay.
And I've got much other um, important things to put
Mhm.
my emotion into.
One of these important things is the pamphlet that you're putting together.
Mm.
So,
Yeah,
what is that about? And please do let me know when it's done because I want to add it as a resource on my
yeah,
webpage. And I also want to tell the listeners who are hearing this conversation here and they're wondering where can I find a group. If you go to my website and you click on resources, in grief, or if you click on grief, you can find a support group. I have a link there that goes to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and you can actually put your zip code and it will tell you where the groups are, or you can just google it with the area where you are. There are support groups really spread all over, at least here in the US.
yeah.
So
Agreed.
I hope that that helps. So tell us about the pamphlet. What is it
Yeah,
about?
and I really think support groups. If you your listeners and stuff, if you've never been to a support group, go to one. It's a different experience, and in my opinion, a really good experience for somebody like this.
Hmm.
Um, as far as the pamphlet goes, so it's kind of just in the beginning stages and everything, but uh, I titled it "What Do I Do Now?" and it says advice from a lost survivor of murder suicide. And it's basically just some basic tips. We're hoping to print this and give it to first responders, give it to mortuaries, places where people
Go to,
are,
yeah.
yeah, and they're lost. I mean, that first week, it's all about the funeral arrangements and all the shock and everything, and you really can't comprehend a lot of this until after the funeral. And then after the funeral, like we had a little joke. It was like when the funeral potatoes are gone. What do you do? That's when
Hmm.
everybody goes home. Everybody else goes home, and you're still stuck with this. And with murder suicide, it's a little bit different than
Hmm.
regular suicide. So I put this like little tips like don't read the news.
Mm.
With
Yeah.
regular suicide, you don't worry about that. Murder suicide, it's going to be in the news, and the story's never going to be right.
No.
And I put in here my experiences, what happened to me, and why I say don't read the news because of this, because of that. And realistically, it doesn't matter if the news gets it right or not because tomorrow it's a different story. You know, don't dwell on that. You got so much more to dwell on. So there's just little tips, finding the lifeline, like I told you with my sister-in-law. She was my lifeline. So
Mm.
finding a
I
lifeline.
love that
So
name, Lifeline.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. Little things like that. Don't make major decisions right then. You don't sell your house, don't buy a car, don't things like that. Eh, Give yourself some time because a
Mhm.
lot of these decisions you might come to regret later. Because you're in the moment of things.
Yeah.
So it's just little tips like that that will at least get people on the right thing or on the right path. And then on the back of it, I just kind of tell my basic little story as far as
Mhm.
what happened, and why I feel like I'm in a position to give this advice. So that it's
Mhm.
not just coming from some random person. It's coming from somebody who's actually dealt with some of this and knows a little bit about what they're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. And you were talking, I'm thinking one of the advices could be, I'm sure you have it down there, but be very selective about who is around you. Because again, that's a peculiarity of murder suicide. There will be people who will blame you, not only
Mhm.
for the suicide, or maybe they'll believe you were the one who did it. So be
Right.
very selective.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It definitely is. And for the most part, you know, the family you're going to be around your family and your friends at first.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah,
just when things start to settle down. I mean, because for you, I mean, for me, year later, 2 years later, I'm still in this. But all of my family who didn't have that close of a relationship, they're back to their normal lives. All of my friends, they were back to their lives the week after.
yeah,
And I'm still kind of in this rut, like, hey, what about me? Type of a thing. And then that's when you do have to very really be careful because there are people out there who will try and take advantage or just, I've had people post just stupid things
yeah.
on social media
Oh,
just to
that's
get in.
one. Avoid social media.
Yeah.
If
Yes.
you have
Yeah.
to choose between the news and social media, watch the news.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But and if you watch the news, most likely you're not going to see something. But if you go read the news and you look for it, you will.
You
And
will.
that's where
Yeah,
the issue comes. And
yeah.
is just be careful. Yeah.
Well, Michael, how was this for you? As
Oh,
it
it was
was
good.
the first one.
Yeah, it was actually really good. I do want to show. So here's
The
you see that
picture.
very well.
Well, for those who are listening, go to my
Yeah.
YouTube channel because Michael is showing the picture of his family, the girls.
So this was in
And
November, right before. So basically 2 months before.
2 months before they died.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, a month after.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh.
In Disneyland.
Yeah, go to my YouTube channel so you can see them. Thank
So
you.
yeah.
Thank you for showing. Thank you for saying their names,
Yeah.
talking about them, about who they were when they were alive, because that's important,
Yep.
and
It
and
is.
being proud to show that picture. And thank you
Yeah.
so much for being so candid, Michael, and
Oh,
for
you're very
giving
welcome.
me the immense honor of being the first to interview you. I'm really, really proud. I'm really happy about that.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story and your wow, your it's just an experience that no matter how much I try, I cannot relate to. Nobody
Yeah.
can really.
I hope nobody does.
No, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here with us.
Sure.
And
Thank
if
you.
someone wants to get in touch with you, is there any way? Do you want to
Yeah.
be contacted? Maybe someone
Yeah.
is
Sure.
listening and been through the same.
Absolutely. So you can reach me at email address. It's michael.johnson@loss.care.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Michael. Have a great day.
All right. You too. Thanks.